Hello, and welcome back to another furtastic episode of Furries in the Media, the series that reviews video clips and other media based on how the furry fandom is represented. I'm your host, Abergwine.
And I'm your co-host, Sam. So, Abergwine, what video clip are we looking at today?
None of them. We're actually going to be reviewing an article from the Daily Mail.
We're starting back on a UK tabloid? Oh, joy. What's the title?
U.S. Navy woman spends her free time dressing up as a giant husky dog in a homemade fursuit, but she insists it's not a sexual fetish and says her husband and colleagues fully support her furry lifestyle.
That deserves an Oscar for most superfluous title. I mean, what's the point in reading the remaining 3 words in the article?
Yeah, but let's give the rest of it the old college try, Sam. Okay, so the title of this article is pretty terrible. Nothing about the first half of the title makes me think that her dressing in a dog costume in her free time would have anything to do with sex, so it really just feels like the second half of that title is just wasted ink.
Yeah, but now it's got me wondering whether or not they're going to mention sex in the article itself.
You know, that's exactly it, Sam. I think you've stumbled onto the exact reason sex was even mentioned in the first place.
You think they did it out of spite because it's an article about furries?
Nah, they probably didn't do it out of malice, but I'd wager that they jammed it into the title because that's just what tabloids do, regardless of who or what group of people the article is about. But even though I feel the title would work better if they just cut out the sexual fetish part, I do appreciate that they did immediately clarify that not only does Jordan not take part in it, but that she has the support of her husband and colleagues. Let's move on and look at the bullet points underneath the title.
Jordan Jones, 21, from Indiana, first discovered the world of furry fandom on Instagram. Some furries, people who wear character fursuits in public, do so to fulfill a sexual fantasy. However, Jordan insists this is not the case as far as her furry character is concerned. Jordan, who is stationed in California, says her husband Bailey fully supports her furry hobby. She also says her colleagues appreciate her furry alter ego, Aurora Bloom.
First things first, we've got an inaccuracy in the second bullet point. True, some furries do partake in adult stuff, but that's not what I'm talking about. A furry is not defined by wearing an animal costume, but rather by being a fan of animals with human-like qualities, such as walking upright, talking, wearing clothes, that sort of stuff. But there's something else that bugs me about that second bullet point. When I take my time to slow down and read it as a whole, it makes perfect sense. But if I skim through it, or if I'm not really paying attention, it reads like, furries dress in animal costumes for the purpose of fulfilling a sexual fantasy.
Abby, do you honestly believe that the author's intention was for every reader to come away with that exact interpretation just from skimming that particular bullet point?
Not at all. Most people might not even notice, but that's my initial impression when I skim through it. One thing that I have no doubt was intentional was the use of the phrase sexual fantasy, because that's going to grab the reader's attention and make them want to read the rest of the article. But again, they do immediately mention that Jordan is not into that stuff, and she's supported by her friends and family.
A U.S. Navy woman has revealed how she spends her free time masquerading as a giant husky dog in a handcrafted fursuit in order to entertain her 23.6K Instagram followers, but she insists the quirky extracurricular activity isn't a sexual fetish for her.
The first paragraph is almost a rephrasing of the title that introduces a little bit more detail, which is perfectly fine for the first paragraph. But, much like the title, they needlessly bring up that it's not a sexual fetish for her. What part of a person dressing up in a costume to post to their Instagram would imply to the average reader that that would have anything to do with sex?
Abergwine, you've seen Instagram. Some of the most popular accounts often utilize sex appeal to some degree.
True, and I could see how that context might make the reader wonder how a woman wearing a husky costume has so many Instagram followers. But there are also plenty of other Instagram accounts that don't rely on sex appeal, and Aurora Bloom's is among them. Sam, I understand the point you've made, but if we weren't already at our third mention of sex, I bet the reader probably wouldn't even be wondering whether or not that's a factor for her.
Are we really at our third mention of sex already? Okay, they've made it abundantly clear that Jordan's interest in furry has nothing to do with sex, but I'm willing to bet they're going to talk about that side of furry fandom somewhere in this article.
U.S. Navy aircrew survival equipment man Jordan Jones, 21, from Henryville, Indiana, first discovered the furry fandom when she was 18 after seeing a group of people dressed in fursuits in public and loved the idea. However, when she learned that the suits cost anywhere between $3,000 to $5,200 to buy, she put her dream of joining the fandom on hold. Then, last year Jordan was browsing Instagram and discovered the fursuits again. This time she decided she would make her own and spent just $400 on materials to make her suit, which then took a month and a half of handcrafting to complete.
I love that they included how Jordan found the furry fandom and how she came to the decision to make her own fursuit. I feel like the inclusion of how she came to the decision to make her own fursuit represents what a lot of furries experience.
Are those prices they mentioned accurate?
I'd say $3,000 to $5,000 is accurate for the average buying price of a full-body fursuit, but of course the price can start lower or end up being much higher depending on a multitude of factors, such as what type of fursuit is being made, how complex the character design is, and what sort of style the suit will be. One last thing I wanted to address was this part where it says she put her dream of joining the fandom on hold.
Does that mean that Jordan felt that she couldn't join the fandom unless she had her own fursuit?
I'm not sure. Maybe this was just a case of the article not doing the greatest job of conveying meaning or something, but hear me out. You don't need a fursuit or even a fursona to call yourself a furry, join the furry fandom, go to a convention, start a YouTube channel, or whatever your furry little heart desires. You get out there and be awesome.
For Jordan, who is currently stationed in California, the best thing about the furry fandom is the positivity and people it has connected her with whilst offering her an escape from her hectic life through being able to portray her character.
I'm glad they included this part. I think Jordan's experience with the furry community is representative of what a lot of furries experience within the community. The furry community can be very welcoming, offers a way for friends to communicate with each other and make new friends, and it can serve as a form of escapism from everyday life.
Whilst for some, the hobby might be a sexual fetish, Jordan doesn't partake in this aspect of the fandom, with her husband Bailey completely supportive of her pastime.
Well, there they go mentioning sex again, but I do appreciate the way this sentence is structured.
But it still mentions sex when it doesn't need to. What's so great about this sentence?
I don't really know if I can put it into words, but maybe I can show you what I mean by flipping it around.
Jordan doesn't partake in this aspect of the fandom, with her husband Bailey completely supportive of her pastime, whilst for some, the hobby might be a sexual fetish.
Granted, that could use some more refinement because it's a little wonky, but bear with me. Switching those parts around changes the meaning that is conveyed through this sentence. The first sentence acknowledges the existence of the adult side of furry fandom, yet clarifies that Jordan is an exception to this. She doesn't partake in that side. End of story. By placing the mention of the hobby being a sexual fetish for some furries at the end of the sentence, it undermines the first half of the sentence that emphatically states that Jordan doesn't partake in it and could serve to potentially confuse the reader as to whether or not she partakes in the adult side of the fandom. I think the way the sentence was ultimately written most accurately reflects the truth for both Jordan as an individual and for the furry fandom at large.
But the sentence still mentions sex when it really didn't need to.
Oh, I completely agree. I think this article doesn't need to mention sex at all, and I'm not just saying that as a furry who wants to present a squeaky clean image of the fandom, and I'll talk more about that later. But I'm saying that as far as this sentence in particular goes, I think they handled it just fine.
The furry fandom is a subculture interested in animal characters with human personalities and characteristics. Examples of these attributes include exhibiting human intelligence and facial expressions, speaking, walking on two legs, and wearing clothes.
Hey, they got it right! This part does a fantastic job of explaining both the furry fandom and the concept of anthropomorphism without overwhelming the reader with too much information.
I wish they had put this part ahead of that last segment we just looked at.
Nah, you know what they should have done? They should have, taken notes from this part for that second bullet. No, they should have just stuck this in there as is.
Ooh, I like that even better. The reader's properly informed right from the start.
Her hobby is no secret from her Navy colleagues, with Jordan even dressing up as Aurora for a recent Halloween event to entertain the children. My husband isn't a furry at all but supports me in every aspect of it. Everyone at my work does know about it too. They think it's cool.
Oh, awesome! They've got a direct quote from Jordan herself where she states that she has the support of her husband and colleagues. Having direct quotes like this makes it easier for the reader to understand exactly what the interviewee is trying to communicate, and it also shows me that they're not trying to suppress her message just so they can push a predetermined narrative.
The message I'd like to convey is that not all furries are only interested in the sexual fetish side of the fandom. This is the stereotypical thought when people think of furries. Just like every community, there are many who partake in the sexual aspect, but many do not. There is nothing wrong with being interested in that side of the fandom, and nobody should shame them for this either. It's just not for me personally. Most just enjoy acting like a giant animal and portraying their characters.
Again, I love that they're using direct quotes from her. And as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to talking about the adult aspect of furry anywhere in this article, I think the statements from Jordan do a better job of articulating the existence and prevalence of the adult side of the fandom, as well as the general opinion of that side within the furry community. Honestly, I wish that the article hadn't said anything else about the adult side and just let Jordan's quotes do the talking. I thought that you were okay with that one sentence. In that particular instance, yes, I am still okay with that sentence. But I wish that overall the article could have handled talking about the adult stuff differently. I've got a lot that I'm just chomping at the bit to say about on that, but it'll have to wait for my thoughts because right now we're going to go into the review score. Now let's take a look at the review stats. Information accuracy is 83%, and the spirit of the article is 100%, coming together for an average. And now time for my thoughts. Are we really going to pretend that just didn't happen? What didn't just happen? With the scoring! We've got an 83 for the accuracy, but what the heck happened to the spirit score? I don't know. I feel oddly conflicted. It's like I gave it both a 40% and a 100%, but that can't be right. Well, luckily we're at the best possible place in the video to talk about it. Let's first talk about why you felt that the article deserved a 40 for the spirit score. Hey, they never got around to talking about the adult side of furry fandom in this article. Man, I was sure they would with how often they kept bringing it up. Exactly. The most of the article talks about sex are the times that we are reminded that it's not about sex for Jordan, but neither does the article go into any detail about the adult side of furry fandom just in general. Even that one sentence that I praised for its structure doesn't really give the reader any new information other than seemingly being an excuse for squeezing in another mention of the phrase sexual fetish. Then why bring it up at all? Because sex sells. Now, maybe the Daily Mail knew that their audience might already have the preconceived idea that furries were only interested in sex, in which case they needed to set the record straight. But given how frequently it's waved in our faces with no real attempt at properly explaining away this misconception, I think the real reason the phrase was used this way was to grab the reader's attention and try to coax them into reading the article to completion. It feels like they've resorted to using the old carrot on a stick, which is really a shame because not only does it undermine the reader's intelligence and any commitment to finishing the article they might have already had, it also cheapens the fact that this is actually a well-written article. Is it a literary masterpiece? I wouldn't say so. But it's a decent read that shouldn't have to rely on such cheap tactics to make the reader want to finish reading the article. Do you really think they were trying to make furries look bad? I don't think so, but intentional or not, the way that they kept mentioning it so frequently in a story about furries could ultimately give a reader the wrong impression or association. There are plenty of places where the article could have used at least one of the times they mentioned sex to clarify in more detail that furry doesn't have to be a sex thing, but they just don't do that. Another option they could take would be to not mention sex anywhere, and just let the quotes from Jordan at the very end be the only mention of it. Cause, like I already said, I think Jordan's quotes say it far better than anywhere else in the article. Yeah, I can see your reasoning for wanting to have the spirit score be 40%. I know, but like I said there, it's not like they set out to make furries look bad either. Let's look at why I also feel the spirit should be given a 100. You know, for being a tabloid article, they actually did a pretty good job of covering furries in a positive light. Yeah, when I first found this article, I was like, oh great, what are we in for? But as I read through it, I was pleasantly surprised and genuinely impressed that it's as positive and accurate as it is. I wonder what Jordan herself has to say about the article. Well, while I was doing research for this episode, I checked Aurora Bloom's Instagram to see if she had posted anything in response to this article, and this is what she posted.
Not the Navy. I am dead, tears of joy loudly crying. IDK who made this meme, but good job cause it's going around like crazy. And yes, I've seen it, you don't have to send me 1,028,472 messages and comments asking if I know about it, lol. Yes, this is me. Yes, I'm in the Navy. Jeez. The article is real and was done by the Daily Mail. Check it out, it's pretty positive, 1-2 hearts. Also, I am in no way offended or mad, it's funny, haha. Trust me, I'm not the kind of person to get hurt by petty memes, comments from people on the internet, guys, don't worry. I appreciate all the positive messages though.
Wow, she actually seems to praise the article for being positive. Yeah, and I'm glad that she does too. Now, granted, I still think this article brings up sex more often than it needs to, but more importantly, I want to take the time here to talk about what the article does right. This article not only includes direct quotes from Jordan, but those quotes also seem to drive the article's entire narrative, rather than misquoting, ignoring, or taking those quotes out of context in order to fit a predetermined narrative. Even the images that were used were done so tastefully. The images are, first of all, of the person they're interviewing instead of just generic stock photos, and secondly, they used flattering images of Jordan both in and out of her fursuit. Yeah, they bring up sex more often than they needed to, but it seems like for every time they mention that it's not a fetish for Jordan, they also mention that her husband and colleagues support her. They don't just stop at, it's not a fetish, but they also show that she has family and friends who aren't furries themselves, but they accept her for who she is. This part, no, everything that I've mentioned here, it all serves to being an uplifting representation of furries that ultimately serves to humanize Jordan. And I feel that the goal in an article like this should be to show that the person being interviewed is just as human as the reader. It's for this overarching reason that I feel that this article from the Daily Mail knocked it out of the park.
I think I can see why there was a conflict in the scoring. Think there's any way we can resolve this?
Nah, I think we're simply going to have to call this one inconclusive. Well, that's it for today's episode of Furries in the Media. Have fun, stay awesome, bye-bye!